With Chapter 8, again, we're going to break it down into about 4 lecture labs. So I'll do a lecture, I'll take you so far into Chapter 8, and then we'll have a lab associated with it. And that's what we'll start on in today's class. So we'll do that for about a week. All right, look at Chapter 8 is the key foundation of what we're going to be doing with Python and scripting in the second 8 weeks of the semester. And Chapter 8 gets us into the realm of functions. Functions in Python, in our C derivative languages, are reusable pieces of code. So we get a process down that we like, it does the job for us, we can create it as a function, and we can reuse that code over and over and over again. And it works extremely well. We can call that code or use that code anywhere in our program, and we can call it an infinite number of times. Now, when I say call, that means that we're going to be able to go out in our program and tell it to run our function from any place. So this is really the next step that we need to get into. When we create a function, each function has a unique name associated with it. And you'll see them referred to as functions, defs, or even blocks of code. So you can look for those different type of names if you do any looking out on the internet. Probably the most important building block, again, in Python that we're going to look at this semester because, first of all, it's usable in programs and can help us save time, and it can help us standardize what we're writing in our programs. Second, it's going to be used to create something we'll see in Chapter 9 called modules. And that gets us even further into streamlining our code and making it work. And finally, if you get into doing large amounts of programming or large scripting, you can actually create libraries of code bits and pull those code bits into your program, or actually call those code bits from your program, again, to make creating your code much, much faster and much, much simpler. All right, we'll start at the beginning. By the way, if you would, well, we'll do that in a second. When we look at a function, the first thing you need to remember is that it's defined by the keyword def, D-E-F. All right, and we'll look at a code piece here in a second, but let's break down the components to start with. Every function that we create is going to start with the word def, D-E-F. Pretty simple. Next, we're going to have an identifier, and that's the name of the function. You can call a function anything you want to call it, with the exception of reserved words in Python. So you could even call it a number, I guess, if you wanted to. It wouldn't identify it extremely well. My recommendation, when you created an identifier, make that identifier give you a pretty good idea of what that function is going to do as you go through. After the identifier, we're going to have a set of parentheses and then a colon. We're going to look at that set of parentheses when we get together next Tuesday. And finally, we're going to have the variables and or the code that's going to run our function. First code that we print out is hello world, just to give us a sample of what it does. You can see our definition, you can see the name, or our identifier. It explains what this function is going to do, and it's a very simple function. All we need is the reserved word print and then what we want it to print out. Notice down at line 9 where I've got the script. That's all we have to do to call that code. Down here under the run grid, and you can see what happens. So again, it's very simple in how we create these functions, and how they operate, and they save us time. And we could rerun that function as many times as we wanted to in this program. Notice that this example, say hello, parentheses and colon, it takes no parameters. So we don't have anything listed in those parentheses. Pretty simple. Parameters are going to help us pass the variables back and forth between the program and the function, regardless of where that function originates. So when we want to pass information back and forth, we'll actually assign variables between those parentheses. Let's see, function parameters. This is pretty simple. They're the values that are going to be supplied to the function. Well, that makes sense. The function usually performs some action with those parameters. By the way, they can be a character string, they can be a set of integers, or they can be float values. You can pass anything that your function needs through that parameter process. We can do multiple parameters. I think we start off in the exercise doing just a very simple one, and then we add a couple more. The number of parameters that we can pass is limited by your programming skills and how much you want to add in, how much you want to have that function do. Multiple parameters, very simply, separated by a comma. And we can combine, let's say, a character string, comma, and a numeric value in the same parameter setup without any problem. So it's however we're going to define that operation, we can make it work for us. Function definitions are called parameters. The values supplied are called arguments. So when we create a function, we create parameters. When we call that function from our code, we're passing arguments up to that function. So this is a little background on the function. You can look at in the first part of chapter 8 how it works, and it'll explain this in a little more detail, but this gives us some common ground to get started on. Okay, what I want you to do, and I'll give you a minute or two to do this, start Python or PyCharm, open a new project, and open a new file. All right, we're going to enter the first section of code together, and then I'm going to give you a lab assignment to finish out the rest of the code. It's a simple assignment. Don't overthink it, all right? But let's build our code package first. All right, and this comes out of chapter 8. I want you to enter line 6. What are we doing here? We're defining a function, gold star. And how many parameters does our function have? 2. Very good. So how many arguments are we going to have to pass when we call this function from our script? 2. So we've got our definition, we've got our identifier, we've got our parameters, we've got our colon. What's left? The code. So here are the first 2 lines of code. Those of you who look and say, wait, I've seen that before. Absolutely correct. We're building on what we learned in chapter 7. Here's the next line. Next 2 lines. We've got if A is greater than B, if A equals B, so the last thing we need to put in here is line 14 and 15. What else could it be? Well, B would be greater, so B is maximum. So we've created our function. Again, there's no real end type of code or reserve word that we put at the end of the function, and we're ready to go on. So line 17 and 18 we'll call our main loop, our comment, and then our print statement. So now all we need to do is test our code. There's everything that we created, And when you look at the run grid, it'll tell you that 4 is the maximum number. So it's picking out the two numbers that have been sent as arguments and telling us which number is greater. So the first thing we'll do is comment out our print statement that says print max 3, 4 and add an x and y value in. And then when we do that, we're also going to have to add line 24 to call our function again. We run the code, 7 obviously greater than 5. So we've proven that at least in 2 different instances, our function works the way we designed it. I want you to modify your script using raw input in the main loop to input 2 numbers. The main loop is only going to run once. Print your code and the run results. If you have questions, ask me. Do your own work. You have until the end of class. This is worth 40 points. I'll tell you right now, you can modify 2 lines of code and be done in 2 minutes if you think it through and analyze what's required.